Hello and welcome to Digital India Summit 2020, Enabling the New Normal, co-presented by Tata Consultancy Services and banking partner Union Bank of India. The summit focuses on how digitization is causing the people and the economy to evolve and adapt to the new normal. In our sixth outing, we're focusing on enabling the new normal. If you've been interacting with millennials and ever had to receive or pay money to them, more often than not, you would have been asked for your Google Pay ID, Phone Pay number or any other mode of digital payment. This is the reality of India's digital payment space, where consumers are becoming more comfortable with money in the form of bytes rather than printed notes. And while the trend is more prevalent in urban India, rural India is not too far behind. Our next panel will look at what lies ahead for the fast-growing, ever-evolving digital payment space in India. Times Network's Chandra Shrikant is in conversation with Rahul Chari, co-founder and CTO PhonePe, Akhil Handa, head FinTech, Partnerships, Mobile Banking and Digital Lending at the Bank of Baroda, and C.M. Maladi, head Banking, Financial Services and Enterprise Business Platforms at TCS.
Hello and welcome to this special discussion. We are calling this Digital Payments Crusaders in Crisis because if there is one segment that's really prospered during the pandemic, it is digital payments. It was already taking off in India in a big way, and we have seen a huge surge in the last few months. In fact, RBI has an ambition, and it says it won't be long before we see 1.5 billion transactions a day, as opposed to 2.5 billion transactions a month. We are already seeing UPI making great strides in that direction. The UPI has been clocking billions of transactions a month, and perhaps it will only be some time before we see that happening per day. To take us through the next wave, the next frontier as far as digital payments is concerned, we're joined by a very special panel. We have Rahul Chari, who's the co-founder of PhonePe. We have Mrs. C.M. Aladi from TCS. And we also have Akhil Handa, the head of FinTech at Bank of Baroda. Thank you very much, all three of you, for joining us for this special panel discussion. Let me start with you, Rahul, someone who has seen this digital wave in the payment space firsthand in the last few months. What is going to be the next big thing as far as digital payments is concerned? We are seeing regulations change, we're seeing new entities coming in, but how do you see the next 1 year, 2 year on India's journey as far as digital payments is concerned?
Definitely, I think through this crisis, through this pandemic, one of the things that has been very, very encouraging is the level of adoption that we have seen for digital payments from both sides, from the consumer side as well as the merchant side. And I think that is extremely important because so far it has been largely consumer driven. It's been a consumer focused effort by a large part of the ecosystem, and the merchants were participants in that because the consumers were really coming on to the platforms in a big way. I think what we're going to see over the next year and couple of years is digital payments becoming foundational to the whole digitization of small businesses across the country. It's the first step that a lot of these small businesses take towards digitization, right? What this means is business is not really curtailed to your hyperlocal environment anymore. And there's an opportunity to expand beyond your existing small base of customers. And I think that's a huge, huge thing for a lot of these businesses. In the near term, I think one of the other things that is going to be transformational for payments per se is going to be effectively standing instructions and small time payments becoming significantly more easier. The model of friction to make a payment going away and risk based authorizations coming into play in a big way. UPI 2.0's auto payments, I think, is going to be extremely transformational for a lot of businesses, including small businesses. So I think digitization through payments of MSMEs and standing instructions and recurring payments are going to be two themes that are going to be fairly transformational.
Right. And Akhil, if I can come to you, how is Bank of Baroda really be part of this in a big way across different segments, be it credit, be it lending, be it payments? How do you really envision BOB's role, and what role can this potentially play in driving financial inclusion?
Of course, Bank of Baroda is a large public sector entity. And as a PSB, there's a special emphasis on financial inclusion. Financial inclusion underpinnings are payments, and
Right.
that of course over the last, uh, I would say now about 6 years, the Jandan accounts, the increasing penetration of smartphones and Aadhaar that has enabled the financially excluded or less served customers to be brought into the fold. And we saw a very, very effective usage of that trinity during the pandemic, when the direct benefits were transferred over to the beneficiaries at the click of a button. And they, of course, from there on, have to also get used to doing the payments to merchants. That is a work in progress, but I do feel that the pandemic has given an impetus of about 2 to 3 years to the digitization wave that we were seeing. As a result of which, more and more customers are getting onto this, and now we are in fact outside of that early adopters league, and we are moving to the large middle segment where customers are becoming more comfortable in using their
Hmm.
digital payment applications. Now, as Rahul was alluding to earlier, merchants also are, on the other hand, becoming a lot more used to being able to ask from the customer's perspective. Customers are demanding the digital acceptance infrastructure, and as a result of which, merchants have also started becoming more used to be able to accept. And this, I believe, is also going to be a very fundamental change that we are seeing, and it is here to stay as we move forward.
Right. Mr. Aladi, IT services is one segment that has been talking about this accelerated shift to digital, how the accelerated adoption to cloud has really helped IT companies, because a lot of clients are doing this globally. Now, you head up the banking, finance, enterprise business platforms for India's largest software exporter. What opportunities do you see in digital payments? What kind of innovations will it take to really drive India to say 1.5 billion transactions a day? How is TCS really working on this?
If you look at the total number of transactions, we are talking about UPI, 2 billion transactions a month. The UPI for a consumer to do a UPI transaction, he needs three things. One, he needs phone, he needs
Hmm.
the account, and he needs the connectivity to establish and do the transaction, right? So if you look at India as a overall, we have 1.15 billion telephone subscribers. But when you
Hmm.
look at the smartphones, it translates to 768 million smartphone connections. Then around
Correct.
20 million people are into the connecting to the digital payment infrastructure. And some of the reports says that 100 million people do the regular transactions on digital payments. Now, when you look at where is this growth comes from, one, from the people who have not adopted the technology yet, there are around 350 million people who don't have a proper smartphone connection at all. That's one segment, which is purely a gap. Second is the people who have got their smartphone but not using the digital payments, right? That's a second segment.
Hmm.
The third segment is people are regularly using the transactions, but they are not doing more than one transaction a month. If you look at 100 million people doing 2 billion transaction, translates to 20 transactions a month. That means they are doing less
Hmm.
than one transaction a day. So how do we create the ecosystem? More and more purpose-oriented payments. Like today, if you look at bill payments is a purpose, school fee is a purpose. Like there are multiple purposes. I do a transaction every day from morning to evening, right? At least every citizen does 3 to 4 transactions a day. So if you look at the prospect from here, there are opportunities to cover people who are not covered. There are opportunities to increase the transaction volume from the people who are already using it. Payment is the last leg of any need that you fulfill, right? When you buy, you make a payment. When you take a
Hmm.
service,
Hmm.
you make
Hmm.
a payment. And payment is invisible behind, right? So how do I make the products innovations? I think payment is a largely an ecosystem play. It's not one person's play. The acquirers, the processors, the clearing and settlement agency, and the issuers, actually each one has their own way of innovation and bringing the value back to the customer.
Rahul, one of the game changers from NPCI this year was UPI 2.0, which is basically recurring payments. Has that helped you kind of create more value for consumers? For example, if I was using PhonePe for, say, a grocery payment, am I now using it 4, 5 times a day for different purposes? How are you creating lifetime value for these customers? And as you said, kind of get all this to a hub. What are the challenges there?
We are currently actually still working on our product for UPI 2.0, both as a part of the ecosystem wherein we become a very important part of the entire payment space to be enabling it, as well as our own use cases. But definitely, I think there are many, many things that can be a game changer when it comes to recurring payments. You could actually start having tabs at a lot of common stores and where consumers can pay one time rather than piecemeal payments at every level. What that does is, in a great way, reduces the friction when it comes to daily purchases, the amount of load on the entire ecosystem, right from bank to the UPI switch to the servers on the PSP side, etc. At the same time, it also opens up avenues for significantly higher lock in between a customer and a merchant. So I do believe that recurring payments can be thought of in multiple ways, not just for the subscriptions and the large ticket items, but for a lot of unorganized payments, peer-to-peer transactions. You could actually look at recurring payments in a completely different manner, right? Uh, Today, in fact, if you were to make an experiment in Bangalore or Bombay of stepping out without cash and spending the entire day just using digital forms of payments for everything, I'm very, very sure you'd be able to do it without breaking a sweat. The same thing through the pandemic has actually expanded. It actually has expanded beyond the metros. The opportunity, right, like Mr. Aladi very correctly put, is if we can very rapidly replicate that in the tier twos and beyond. Today, for us, 70% of our new users and a very large percentage, more than 65% of our transactions come from tier two and beyond. And our largest investment from an acquiring perspective is going to be in the semi-rural and rural part of the country towards actually acquiring merchants so that this behavior starts having the network effect it's already had on the metros and the tier ones.
Akhil, in terms of the investment that banks have to now make to cope with all this load, these new kind of payments, are banks really prepared from an infrastructure point of view? I mean, what kind of infrastructure investments in infrastructure do banks have to start making in order to prepare for these new technologies? Because it's very clear that this is going to become a widespread phenomenon. If you look at the recent festive sales, if you look at how PhonePe has been doing, a lot of people have taken to digital payments in smaller towns, in smaller cities.
See, we have to understand the background of the bank's core banking, and the bank's
Hmm.
core banking was never designed for high volume, low ticket transactions, as what is now becoming the de facto norm. And as a
Correct.
result of it, see, this has huge ramifications in terms of the load on the system. And while as customers, we may not realize the fact that making these 10 rupee, 100 rupee transactions compared to the 1000, 5000 ATM withdrawals that we used to do earlier, the kind
Hmm.
of excessive load that we end up putting on the system and the pipes. So the first thing is, of course, to expand the pipes. But expansion of pipes can only take you that far, because ultimately the architecture of the core banking was never designed to support this kind of volume. But beyond the point, as the ambition is to grow the digital payments almost 10, 20, 30 times from where we are right now, I don't think those things will be adequate. We will have to figure out other ways of dealing with the volume, and especially the high volume, low ticket transactions. And there are certain designs that are under discussion at the industry level, in terms of perhaps a wallet kind of a structure at a clearing entity
Hmm.
could be more useful way rather than hitting the core banking again and again. So there are these different options that are available, and I think we will have to soon make choices to be able to cope up with the kind of volume that we see. For now, we are okay, but there are always peaks, and these peaks happen either at the end of the month, at the end of the quarter, or during festive season, and that is where the problem occurs. Look, the
Right.
other
Again,
side
just
of
a
it.
quick follow-up question for you. Um, is it more challenging for PSU banks compared to private sector banks in that sense? Because the likes of an ICICI or a HDFC, they have invested in many of these tech interfaces for a very long time. So, in that sense, would you have to double down compared to some of these leading private sector banks?
See, I think there is absolutely no difference between a public bank and a private bank when it comes to being able to offer the service. And this is not just me, you don't have to take my word
Hmm.
for it. These are publicly available figures, for example, on UPI technical declines. And you can see the technical declines, for example, I can talk about Bank of Baroda is best in class. And this is very very good in terms of what we have, and a technical decline of the order of a percentage point is absolutely golden standard, and which is why it is absolutely it's of utmost importance that we take a more realistic view. See, every service that anybody in the value chain has to offer comes at a certain cost, and we must be very mindful of it. And see, there are some real benefits of doing digital payments, and they accrue across the supply chain. They accrue to the consumer, the merchant, in terms of ease of handling, ease of payments, ease of collections, also to the government. So someone has to really foot the bill, because if you're really talking about a 50x increase in transaction volumes, and the kind of infrastructure investments that are required can only happen, if we have a sustainable model.
Mr. Ladi, would you like to add to this on how one can really make it a self-sustaining model?
Point is that, see, India is a country where you get a digital payments at a lowest cost ever globally because of the sheer volume, right?
Yeah.
So one is a volume game because we are talking about 1.3 billion people, right? And the small ticket transactions happening. And second aspect is that India is the place where, if you look at the third prominent country have a fintech innovation. I think the innovation perspective and our guys, especially Indians, are doing a lot of good job in terms of creating those payment innovations. If you look at the number of payment innovations that we have in India, and we have surpassed almost all countries, and I think most of the countries are trying to learn how we did digital payments in India. So obviously, I agree with both of them in terms of there needs to be a sustainable business model for everyone in the game, and nothing like free kind of things. But I think the initial the motivation is required for the consumer to onboard onto the digital platform and believe in the digital platforms, and that's where the cost matters a lot in terms of how much they pay for each transaction. And I'm sure over a period of time, these arithmetics
Once you
will
have
get
that
settled.
stickiness.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right. We're approaching the last 5 minutes of this fascinating discussion. Of course, we could go on for a long time because regulations keep changing, trends keep changing in the fintech space every fortnight. But I'm going to ask you all to wrap with perhaps one big prediction or trend for digital payments that you foresee over the next year, 2021, as we enter a new decade. I'm going to start with you, Akhil. Maybe I'll start with Akhil this time.
So, well, I'll stay afraid. I'll refrain from looking into being the oracle, but I can tell you three trends that I observe. One, I think e-commerce will accelerate again by a factor of, again, I believe about 2 years. There will be a jump of anywhere from between 2 to 3 years in the e-commerce as well. The second is
Hmm.
mass transit will give a big boost to the digital transactions going forward. I think
Okay.
the whole smart city and the mass transit is just getting its act together. I think this is something which will be a prime driver going forward. And the third is, I believe, government services and government payments is also becoming very, very important because citizens ultimately, for the delivery of for procuring the services from the government, uh, and government bringing more and more of its services digitally, citizens will be encouraged to use more digital payments for procuring those services. And I think these three, e-commerce, mass transit, and government services, the next growth wave for the digital payments.
Okay, e-commerce, transit, and government, mass transit and government services. Rahul, what about you? What's your big picture idea for 2021?
I think because of a whole bunch of use cases, some of which Akhil mentioned, etc. Feature phones is going to be another one that is going to come into the fray because of all of the number of use cases and feature phones, along with smartphones getting enabled for payments in a much more convenient manner. Next year is going to be the fastest acceleration of new acquisition of users on digital payments ever by a huge margin. I think what we've
So
seen
I
over
think
the
PhonePe recently crossed the 250 million mark, if I'm not mistaken, and 100 million MAUs. So
yeah,
what's it going to be next year then?
I think we'd be easily doubling that huge number by itself. I think that's the way to look at it. I
Wow.
mean, in that base. I mean, that's those are the kind of coattails we are all riding on from digital payments in the country.
Mr. Ladi, I'm going to let you have the last word. What is your big picture idea?
Say the touchless payments. We are used to touch, right? So we need to move out of touch and make it touchless payments. There are several avenues to make it happen. But very important thing is that I think we need to instill the trust in the digital consumer by consumer protection. If you look at the cyber crimes that happens in India, 70% of them are financial cyber crimes. There is a large amount of money people are getting lost because of lack of education, the way they use the digital platforms, and how do they actually reconcile their problems, right? I think if we work along with the payment innovations in terms of making sure that the transaction is secure, fast, simple, and then if you are able to bring in this ecosystem for the acceptance of the payment infrastructure, right? So there needs to be an acceptance infrastructure growing multifold compared to what we are today. And then we are into, definitely there is no dearth for innovation, but essentially creating the last mile infrastructure to enable those payments. And in the urban especially, my view is that moving from a touch to touchless will make the things much more smoother and simpler.
On that note, thank you very much, Rahul, Akhil, and Alari, for talking to us on this special panel on Times Network on the way forward as far as digital payments is concerned. Clearly, 2021 is going to be a landmark year for India. We are perhaps going to see a tipping point in digital transactions because of various technologies, various rails, and factors and use cases coming together. On that note, thank you very much for joining us for this special panel.
That's a wrap on this episode of Digital India Summit 2020, Enabling the New Normal, co-presented by Tata Consultancy Services and banking partner Union Bank of India. Goodbye and thank you so much for watching.